Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Comic Source Podcast. I'm your host, Jace. This episode is a long time coming. It's your indie spotlight for the week of March 19th, 2025. I realize that it's dropping on March 26th, 2025, and it's been a bit of a debacle, a bit of a comedy of errors, and just a bit of life happening, right? So last week, 3 days at a conference for my day job. I was able to sneak away and find a conference room that wasn't being used, and I recorded the DC Spotlight with Rocky, but we didn't have a chance to do the Indie Spotlight, so we thought, okay, well, maybe we'll do it Wednesday. Rocky wasn't available. I was getting caught up. I didn't get home till late anyway because of the conference, and then, so we thought we'd do it Thursday. We said, okay, no problem, and then I forgot that I had a wedding to go to on Thursday, so I didn't get home till super late from the wedding. Friday, my daughter had a dance competition, so I had to go to that. Saturday, I was on call all day, Saturday and Sunday, so I didn't get a chance to do it then. And Monday, I was still getting caught up from all the time I missed at my day job because of the conference. So I was like, okay, well, at least I can record it Wednesday, or Tuesday night, rather, and drop it first thing Wednesday. It'll be a week late, but it'll still be out there. And then Rocky and I can record the Indie Spotlight for the week of March 25th, and I'll drop it the same day. So we recorded our regular DC Spotlight, as we always do on Tuesdays, well, most of the time. And I produced that and whatever. Had dinner, had to do a couple of other things, go pick up my daughter from dance. I get home, and I'm finally settling down to record, and it's late. It's almost 1 a.m. already. And I'm like, okay, I want to get this out because the books that came out for the week of March 19th, 2025, the indie books that I read were awesome. It was a fantastic week. There's about 9 books that I felt like, man, I really, really need to talk about these books. So, started recording a little after 1 a.m., and I told myself, and I even said at the beginning of the podcast, this might be a little bit shorter. First of all, Rocky's not here to join me, so, only one man's opinion as opposed to two. And also, we just go a little faster because it's late. So I get going and I start talking about the books, and before I know it, I'm breaking them down, and I'm probably diving a little deeper than I initially planned on, and I end up recording for about an hour. I think it was like 59 minutes. And by the time I'm done, now it's like almost 2:30 a.m. and I go to clean up the audio in post-production. There's no audio. It's a completely flat line. And I'm like, what's going on? So I always record my episodes in 2 different places. I record them with 2 different programs in case one glitches up or what have you. And I used to also record it directly from my soundboard as well into a digital recorder. I haven't needed to do that in a long time, and the sound quality is not quite as good. So I haven't done that in a while. But it doesn't matter, even had I done that. So I look at one program that I usually use, audio's blank. I go to the other program, I have to convert the audio into a different format, put it into my audio editing software. That one's also blank. And then I remember that on Monday, I had an interview with Ron Mars that'll be coming up next week. And when I plugged my microphone into my soundboard, actually when I turned my soundboard on, I turned my mixer on, there was no sound. And I troubleshot it for a while, and I ended up just, unplugging my soundboard and plugging it back in like 3 times, and then it magically just started working. And when I plugged it in, my soundboard plugged it in to use it for the DC Spotlight on Tuesday. I plugged it in, Rocky heard me, no problems, whatever, it just worked. So I wasn't even thinking to double check, because again, it was late. I really wanted to get the indie episode out for last week, so I didn't bother to check it. And sure enough, when I last night, late, early in the morning, this morning, whatever you want to say, I went and I converted that second audio file, or that second recording of the episode, put it in my audio editing software. It was also blank. So I went to bed at like 3 a.m., not having gotten the episode in the can. I have video. I could put the video up on YouTube, and if you can read lips, I guess, assuming that my lips aren't behind the microphone, you'd be able to tell what I was saying. And I was wondering, man, I wonder if closed captioning, but I'm like, no, that goes off of sound. And it just sucks because whenever this happens, and it's going to happen, it's happened before, it's probably going to happen again. Technical stuff with podcasting, you kind of learn to live with it. But it just sucks because the episode was so late already. And I stayed up specifically to do this, stayed up till 3 a.m., only got like 4 hours of sleep. so I could get it out for you guys, and to just have blank air was just annoying. Because the other part of this is when you do an episode and you're talking about books for the first time, it's spontaneous and you're making your points or whatever, and then you go back and you try to remember what you said, but you really probably can't, and maybe you forget a point. I mean, maybe you add new things in that you didn't think about the first time, but it's frustrating to, spend that time and then have nothing to show for it. So all that being said, this is the Indie Spotlight. The books last week were incredible. I wanted to be sure to talk about them. Sorry it's so late. I will endeavor to make sure this doesn't happen again. And that's the other thing, right? Like, if it hadn't been so late and this had happened, like if it had happened if we record on Wednesday like we try to do, or Tuesday night rather, then we could have got it out Wednesday, the following day, or maybe even Thursday. It's not so late. Now, some of these books may be sold out. And again, I apologize. I don't think any of them were. Like, none of them had huge buzz or whatever. But I understand that the shelves are crowded and maybe there's some retailers that didn't stock a lot of these or what have you. So anyway, with all that being said, long preamble to say that this is going to be a shorter episode. I'm just not going to have time to break them down as much as perhaps I did when I was talking about them yesterday. Like I said, I went for about an hour. Because I still have to record this week's Indie Spotlight. So we're going to kick off last week's Indie Spotlight with the Power Fantasy. This is issue number 7. This is from creators Kieran Gillen and Casper Wingard. Clayton Cowles is the letterer. Ryan Hughes on design. Now, I really went kind of deep into how amazing the Power Fantasy is and what an incredible story it is and everything. And again, I really want to apologize for having this out so late and for not being able to present what I recorded last night, because I'm not going to dive as deep into it as I did last night. What I will say is the premise is really interesting, as opposed to having a world where the superpowers are countries, United States, Soviet Union, that sort of thing. This is set between the end of World War II and 1999, and it basically theorizes that there are these beings, these atomics, or these superpowers, and they have the sort of the ability to end the world, if you will. Now, Kieran Gillen has said that this came out of him writing X-Men, where he's thinking about if beings of this power really attacked each other, they would sort of destroy the Earth. Like, the planet would kind of crack in half. They're so powerful. So that's the kind of the roots of this story, where we have these 6 individuals that have been born, in this time frame. They don't seem to age at the same age that we do, but they do show signs of aging. And they have the ability, especially if they come to blows, to destroy the planet. So how do you live in a world like that? Like, what is that sort of world like when you have these tensions of these 6 individuals who aren't necessarily friends, don't necessarily get along? They have things in common, and sometimes they agree philosophically on some things, but maybe not other things. And this book, it's really about the relationships and about sort of the tension, almost a Cold War type tension. If you grew up in the 70s or 80s, definitely understand what the Cold War was and kind of the looming threat of nuclear war or what have you. Sort of this existential thing that we all sort of lived with, nobody talked about, but we all sort of lived in fear of. And that's kind of the situation we have here. So it's interesting because the world that Kieran and Casper have created, I think they could go back and retell this story when they're done. And Kieran has talked there's essays and back matter in the back. He's talked about how long he wants it to go. It says somewhere around the length of The Wicked and the Divine, which is interesting, and I would love for it to go that long. But obviously we'll see. There's a lot of other factors, sales numbers, and that sort of thing. But to be able to go back when he's done, when he and Casper are done, and tell the same events, but through the eyes of just everyday people, I think there'd be a lot of value in that as well, because this story is told through the perspective of these superpowers. So it's a really interesting story, and it's about character dynamics and what it means to have power, and the whole title, the Power Fantasy, the illusion of power. Just because you have power, do you have control, that sort of thing. Really, really encourage you guys to check it out. It's my highest possible recommendations, and when you do, be sure you read the essays in the back. After each issue, Kieran talks about, he has a little essay, he talks about the book. Some things pertain to that issue that you just read. Some others may be more about the story in more broad strokes. But it's fantastic. It jumps around in that time frame that I said between World War II and year 2000 and 1999. and there's been various timelines and things hinted at where we have the names of these events, but we don't necessarily know what's happened. We know Europe got destroyed at some point. All these people died. The other thing that I would recommend is to just Google like Power Fantasy characters or Power Fantasy cast, and there's a few articles out there that will give you kind of the real quick and dirty description of each of the characters. You get a picture, you know what they look like, and it kind of sets you up a little bit going in to the first issue of who everybody is, because this is one of those books where the people just sort of wear regular clothes, and although they do look distinctive, it's not as easy to sort of tell them apart. When they have those iconic costumes, like, you're not going to mix up Superman and Batman, or Spider-Man and Iron Man. They have those costumes that make them really distinctive. That's not the case here. These people sort of look like regular people. So go check out that cast. There's various articles, like I said. The back matter, really important as well. For this issue specifically, there's a being that comes down. Valentina meets this being, and this being thinks she's from heaven. Valentina is one of the superpowers. She's sort of a self-described angel. Whether she's actually from heaven or not, whether heaven exists, remains to be seen. But this creature that comes down, she starts what's called the Second Summer of Love. The first Summer of Love being 1969, sort of a hippie event, if you will, spreading a lot of love, and there was a lot of pot smoked and singing songs and coming together, fellowship, and that sort of thing. So this angel that comes down, she purports to want to just spread happiness, right? And so she does in Manchester in 1989, and it attracts a lot of other people, just like the Summer of 69 event, or Summer of Love in 1969 attracted a lot of people as well. The other thing is there's a bit of a framing device. We flash forward to 1999, Manchester 1999, so sort of at the end of the story, where we see Valentina talking to somebody through the doors of a cathedral. You'll notice it's all colored in red. And it's the first time that we get a chance to see Eliza Hellhound, the one superpower that we really haven't had the chance to see yet. She's been mentioned by name or referred to, but we haven't really had a chance to see her or see what she's about or whatever. But if you do Google the Superpowers cast, those articles, you can see her there. We're going to see her at the end of this issue, and you'll get an idea of who she is. But in this summer of Second Summer of Love in 1989, what ends up happening is this creature, this angel, she just wants everybody to be happy, but when she's unable to make everybody happy, and we're human, and if you've lived long enough, you're never going to make all of the people happy, but she just loses it and freaks out, and all these people start to die. And in fact, the whole continent of Europe is wiped off the map. We know that previously because this event, this Second Summer of Love, has been mentioned as the time when Europe was destroyed and millions, if not billions, of people died. So it's a scary world. Like I said, it's a scary world that Kieran Gillen has created here. So what's interesting is in this framework story that I was talking about, where Valentina is talking to Eliza Hellhound about the current state of affairs, which we'll talk about in just a moment. I mean, this is how I say current. It's present day for where they are right now, where the story is right now, as opposed to present day of 2025. Like I said, the story kind of finishes up in 1999. But Eliza being Catholic and being religious and what have you, and she's talking about sins and sort of owning up to your mistakes and asking for forgiveness and redemption for your sins and what have you. And here we go. We get a chance to see her for the first time on this final page, and she's acknowledging her sins. And she says, I saved the world. So she was the one that, whoever that being was, that wanted to make everybody happy and flipped out and destroyed Europe. And the reason the whole world wasn't destroyed, apparently, is because Eliza stopped her. But in her own words, she says, I saved the world, and that was my sin. So she's acknowledging that maybe she should not have done so. Maybe that was, her, whether it was hubris on her part, or she just thinks that humans as a race don't deserve to exist. I guess that remains to be seen, but it's a pretty interesting and cynical perspective, but gorgeous art here from Caspar Wingard. The other thing that's happening in the current time, again, in 1999, the present of the main story, is that one of the superpowers has decided he's going to ally with a government, the United States government specifically. Heavy is the superpower specifically. And the rest of the superpowers, the rest of the atomics, are trying to decide what to do about that because it's something they've agreed not to do, because it gives too much power, right? Like in a world that we live in, it's all about, you know, who has nuclear missiles, who has the atomic bomb, and again, going back to the Cold War, it was sort of a precarious balance because if enough people had them, it was what was called mutually assured destruction, right? Like if we launched our missiles, the Soviet Union would detect that and they would launch their missiles, and everybody dies and nobody wins. There's no way to win a nuclear war. Everybody just dies. And so you want to preserve that balance. And so you don't want any particular government in this world that Kieran has created to have a weapon of mass destruction, which is basically what these atomics are. They're sort of walking, talking weapons of mass destruction. So as long as none of them are allied with any particular government or don't have any particular government's agenda that they're backing, the rest of the world sort of feels okay, you know. But if all of a sudden all of the superpowers, or one or however many, start saying, okay, we're going to sort of do the bidding of this one particular government, all of a sudden in the pecking order, that government is way above everybody, and they can sort of impose their will, and then that strikes fear in the hearts of the other governments, and then they may act rashly and force the hand, and they may be like, well, you know, we only have a 1 in 10 chance of possibly killing Heavy, of possibly killing one of these superpower beings, but a 1 in chance is not a 0% chance. So, you know, if we think that he's going to destroy us eventually anyway, let's take our shot. And that leads to bad outcomes, right? Like just having this imbalance in global power can lead to things like rash actions and illogical thinking and what have you. So it's a really interesting book. It's a really political book. It has fantastic art from Caspar Wingard, as you can see, really emotional. These are complex characters. Don't know how long lived they are. Don't know if they're immortal. Some of them have lived longer than others. Again, the story covers about a 50-year time period. But what is clear is they're not omniscient. They're not without their flaws. You know, they might be mortal, they might not be. They might be human, they might not be. But regardless, just like humans have imperfections, these beings have imperfections as well. They have emotions that overcome them, which is another thing that's scary. If somebody's having a bad day, are they going to lash out, what have you? But it's just a really complex story. It's interesting. It is a superhero story in a way, in that they are beings with power, and Kieran Gillen actually talks about that specifically, about how it is a superhero story, but maybe not in the way that you're used to in the back matter for this particular issue. You know, the S word being superhero in his essay. But it's a really interesting perspective. So again, I will encourage you to read these essays. I know sometimes you're a comic fan, you're not the biggest fan of reading prose. You know, you like the pretty pictures, and I don't blame you. And that's kind of how I was when I was young. I'd read the comic, but if there was big text pieces, I'd kind of skip it. But I do encourage you to check this out. Also, I'll mention that all 6 issues of the first volume are out in trade, so if you want to get caught up, that's a great way to do it as well. But this is just a fantastic series. It's been critically acclaimed. I expect it to be nominated for awards. I think 4 printings for the first issue, so definitely go and check it out. It's very much worth your time. All right, up next we have from our friends over at Mad Cave Studios, A Dark Empty Void from friend of the show Zach Kaplan. The art in here is by Chris Shahan. Francesco Segala handles the colors. Agnes Posa on flats and World Designs. Justin Birch handles the lettering. Science fiction story. What Zach Kaplan is very, very good at is taking the genre of sci-fi and telling a really entertaining story, really entertaining science fiction stories, but framing it within the context of science fiction to show the humanity of people, to examine the human condition, to look at where we are societally or culturally or politically. And he's fantastic. So the conceit of this issue is or the series is there's some scientists that have created a stable black hole, but when they did, a a seemingly looking human woman came out of it, but they don't know how or where she came from or how to communicate with her or how to get her back to where she's going. And the black hole seems to be growing, and they need to stop it before it grows big enough to swallow the Earth. So one of the scientists that is working on this project, he left his wife for another one of the scientists, and she never got over it because it happened suddenly. He just, from one day to the next, hey, I'm gone. He left. She happens to be a very capable psychologist and psychiatrist. So when this being emerges that appears to be a human woman, he reaches out to his wife, and she agrees to come and talk to this person and see if she can't get some answers, partly because she still harbors this desire to get back together with him. So she's able to make a connection with this being and get through to her and open up the lines of communication. And so they send a team into the black hole. They think they need to kind of return her and hopefully find a way to seal the black hole. But once they get inside the black hole, there are these insect-like beings that look like they're made out of light. They appear to be hostile, but it's not 100% clear because they haven't really been able to connect or communicate with them. And things kind of go downhill from there with various members of the expedition being killed and what have you. So there's high stakes. It's action-packed. But more than that, it's, again, examining relationships, failed relationships, and what it means to love somebody and care for somebody and make sacrifices and that sort of thing through the lens of this really interesting science fiction story. This particular issue, we see the husband, the ex-husband and wife, I guess you'd say, communicate really for the first time, and we find out that the husband left not necessarily because he was attracted to the other scientist, but because he felt like he wasn't providing his wife with kind of the emotional needs that she needed. He felt like he was failing, and he just kind of wanted out of the situation. So it wasn't quite what it appeared to be, but this reconciliation may be coming somewhat, too late, right? Too little, too late, because they may not survive what's going on with black holes. So I'm not going to get too into particular story beats and plot. I want you to go check it out for yourself. I will say that the tension in the story is conveyed through the artwork of Chris Sheehan very, very well. I think there's one issue left from Zach Kaplan and Mad Cave, and I urge you to check it out, as well as going to check out a lot of previous work from Zach. He's a really talented writer and really thought-provoking stories, so I do recommend his work. So, all right, up next on the list, going to be talking about a book from Boom called The Last Boy. If you're checking us out on YouTube, you'll see the cover here, and clearly this is a Peter Pan story, right? And so it was Peter Pan and the Lost Boys, and now why is this The Last Boy? We'll talk about that in a second. The credits, it's written by Dan Panosian, illustrated by Alicio Avalone, colored by Valentina Pinto, with flats by Agnes Poza and Rick Mack, and it's lettered by Jeff Eichelberry. And obviously the main cover here is illustrated by Dan himself. I wish Dan illustrated all his own stories, and I've talked to him about this before, because the first time I met Dan, I interviewed him for his image series Slots, which he did handle all of the artwork for, and I highly recommend the highest possible recommendation. Such an absolutely fun story set in Vegas and very personal to Dan for a variety of reasons. I encourage everybody to just Google Comic Source Slots, and you'll find the interview I did with Dan way back when we first met, talking about that book, and it's definitely worth your time to listen to that interview and to check out the book. But at the end of the day, Dan is a storyteller, right? He's a fantastic artist. He gets he's got more work than he can handle, more requests to do covers and what have you than he has time for. But he wants to tell his own stories, and he can more quickly get a story out when he only writes it and gets somebody else to draw it. He can write 3 or 4 stories in the time it would take him to do to draw one. So that's why he kind of just sticks to cover work now, because it gives him time to write, where he can tell these other stories and get other artists, fantastic artists, talented artists to draw them. So most recently at Boom, he did sort of a Where Are They Now of Alice in Wonderland, called Alice Ever After, and then Alice Never After was the sequel to that. And so he's kind of continuing this idea of, hey, what if I went back to these sort of really classic stories, Alice in Wonderland, in this case, J.M. Barrie's Peter Pan, and do sort of a where are they now? And that's the play on words here for the title of The Last Boy. So we get a little, I mean, we all know the history of Peter Pan and what have you. A lot of us have seen the Disney movie. I remember that Fox cartoon from the 90s. It's fantastic. And so we get a little bit of context on who Peter Pan is. And we see him flying over Neverland with Tinkerbell. And then the scene shifts. And we're in England, and we're seeing Wendy and her family. Obviously, Wendy and Peter were an item. And again, that Disney movie that a lot of people have seen. But she's grown up as well. I mean, Peter Pan, the boy who never would grow up. But time has passed for so many others of these characters. And so Wendy is trying to be a writer. Her family doesn't necessarily support her in that. But she's grown up. And so it's clear that time has passed. And maybe she's having some memories. And I love how the color work shifts, from kind of the browns to the blues as she's looking off into the sky and thinking about Neverland and Peter Pan and what have you. So as the scene does shift to Neverland, what we discover is that time has passed for a lot of other characters as well, and things have changed. Chief Great Panther is not even leader of the Indian tribe there, or the Native American tribe, I should say, there anymore. Tiger Lily, who in one of the most well-known stories, again, going back to the Disney stuff that was adapted, she was kidnapped by Captain Hook, and Peter went and rescued her. She's actually the chief now. Peter doesn't understand this. He's like, what's going on? I'm here to help you. I've heard that the pirates and Captain Hook or what have you have been stealing pelts, and I'll find out what's going on. And he goes to the pirate ship and he attacks them, and they've moved on as well. In fact, the whole world of Neverland has evolved. Everybody's moved on. Everybody's grown. Everybody's matured, except for Peter. He is the boy who won't grow up. So Captain Hook tries to explain, we're not stealing the pelts. We're not pirates anymore. We're traders. We have, moved beyond that, moved beyond being criminals. We're trying to engage in a little bit legitimate trade. We paid for the pelts. We paid a pretty penny for them. And we just, as we've gotten older here, and you can see some of these pirates, they're depicted much, much older now, even Hook himself. They just want a little peace. They just want a little, hey, let's move on. Let's put away the, frivolity and foolishness of youth. But Peter doesn't want to hear it. He doesn't accept any of this. He doesn't, not only does he doesn't want to hear it, in a way, it's almost like he's sticking his fingers in his ears and saying, la, 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 la. And he's trying to force everybody to be who he wants them to be as they remembered. What's the saying? Nostalgia is a powerful drug. So it's that play on words of Peter Pan, the boy who wouldn't grow up, is now the last boy. It was Peter Pan and the Lost Boys. Now it's the last boy, because he's the last one left. He's the last one who won't grow up. And it's an interesting premise, and I think it, a lot of us, as we get older, we look back on events of the past with sort of rose-covered glasses, and we can forget some of the challenges because it just seems like we got through it. We were fine. We were okay. So there's interesting themes to be examined here by Dan Panosian. The art by Avallone is fantastic. It had to be anybody but Dan drawing it. I'm glad he chose Alessandro Avallone, because the color work is fantastic as well. So I'm really curious to see where this goes. It's really fantastic, really interesting. I'm a huge Peter Pan fan. Not necessarily the Disney adaptation, but man, did I love that 90s cartoon. And yeah, it came out when I was a little bit older. Like I was in high school, and it was kind of aimed at younger kids, but for some reason it really spoke to me. I don't know, maybe there's a part of me that never wanted to grow up. That's why I still love to read comics and superheroes and what have you. So he's a really interesting character to me, and the idea of growing up and trying to hold on to the past and dealing with regrets and all that, those are very relatable sort of human traits, I think, in a lot of ways. So I can't wait till next time I see Dan to chat about this book with him, and maybe we'll have him on when the series is done to talk about it in a little more detail. So definitely recommend it. Check it out. hopefully you can still get a copy because it's definitely worth your time. All right, up next from our friends over at Ghost Machine, we have Rocketfellers. Now, what's interesting about this book, like I couldn't believe this was issue number 4. I had to go back and look like a couple times. Like, wait, I could swear that we've had way more than 4 issues of this, and that's a testament to the job that the storytellers have done here. The storytellers being Peter Tomasi and Francis Manapul, sort of plotting out the story of the Rockefeller family together, and then Peter handling the script and Francis Manapul handling the line work and some of the color work. He's got an assist on the colors by John Kalis and Ian Herring, and then Rob Lee handles the letters as he does for all the Ghost Machine books. So the Rockefeller family, and I said this was going to be quicker, but it's really not. I need to speed it up here. But we see Rachel Rockefeller first, and this is a family from the 25th century. They're hiding out in the 21st century. We don't exactly know why, but one of the things that's great about the book is each particular issue, and I think this speaks to why it feels like it's lasted longer than it has. It feels like we've gotten more story than 4 issues worth. Everybody in the family gets a chance to be on the page a little bit here or there. So it starts out with Rachel. We know she's a pilot. She flies a weather helicopter the current 21st century. She was a sort of a pilot, a space pilot, space shuttle, some sort of extra Earth vehicle. So she's very much kind of a daredevil in a lot of ways. Her husband Roland, who's a scientist who loves to do research and what have you, and they go on a date and they're playing hockey. Again, there's a wholesome family feel to this. Gorgeous art from Francis Manapul. We see Rodney Rockefeller, who is the grandfather, who likes to keep himself in shape, former military guy, a little rough around the edges, but clearly has the attention of all the older women in the neighborhood. They all go running together. Everybody has a crush on him. And we see him sort of berate this guy who is in his car paying more attention to his phone than what's in front of him on the street and almost hits a kid on the skateboard. So again, it's this idea that everybody gets a little bit of time to shine, a little bit of context, adding sort of personality and characterization to the cast, as it were. Now, we met these 2 brothers last issue. They're, for lack of a better term, they're oligarchs. They have all sorts of money, more than they know what to do with, probably. And yet they're so greedy they notice when some of it goes missing. And it's sort of intimated that the Rockefellers, probably with the use of more sophisticated computer programming or what have you that they brought with them from the 25th century, are probably siphoning funds because they can't necessarily get jobs. They don't have like social security numbers or anything like that. And so they probably took a bunch of the money from these guys and they're using it to live on. Well, these guys, in case there was any doubt that they're bad people, we see the way they treat their workers here. When this one guy who's been working like 24 hours isn't going fast enough for them, they basically have him chucked off the roof, as you can see here. So I'm sure we'll learn more about them as the story progresses. And it may be that the Rockefellers have created some enemies here in the 21st century, because the whole reason they're hiding back here is because they have enemies in the 25th century. They're in almost like a witness protection sort of program. We saw Roland talk to his brother Reggie, who seems to kind of work for the law enforcement agency or authorities in the 25th century, communicating back and forth, hey, is it safe to come back, what have you. And we met one of the agents of that agency, Olivia, who Reggie's actually engaged to. So a lot of threads going on here in terms of relationships. But interesting, because the Rockefellers have felt relatively safe hiding in the 25th century, or 21st century rather, but then they may not remain safe now that they seem to have some enemies. We get a chance to see Richie, who's their son. He's been in trouble with school. I will not eat in class is what he's writing on the board, but he's cheating, as you can see, and he's using some technology to write it a bunch of times at the same time while eating in class. And we also see Ray, his younger sister. Again, everybody gets a chance to shine. And they sort of call each other out, Ray and Richie, because they're supposed to be blending in, but she's talking to birds and doing things that she's probably not supposed to do. He's about to use his jet boots to fly home. They decide, maybe we should listen to what our parents are telling us and not stick out like a sore thumb. Meanwhile, we see Olivia, who I mentioned before, Reggie's fiance, travel back to 1875, South Dakota. and this is really the first hint that there are others that are hiding out in the past as well. And we meet this other person who's sort of in this witness protection program. He doesn't seem to necessarily be a good guy, probably why they stuck him back so far. And in fact, he's feuding with the local Native American tribe. Olivia makes a deal on his behalf so that he'll be safe, but he has to give up some pelts that he's been illegally poaching on the Native American land and what have you. And so Olivia returns. We get a moment between her and Reggie, but it's not too long after Olivia leaves this guy that one of the bounty hunters that's hunting for the Rocketfellers shows up. Now, I don't know that maybe she just sensed current time travel. We don't have those details. We don't know exactly what happened. But she goes back there. She ends up killing this guy. And then she calls in to report that the time zone integrity is preserved. And there's still no sign of Roland and his family. So, who this woman is, this bounty hunter, we've seen her before. She seems to be the enemy of the Rocketfellers and the enemy from the future. And it remains to be seen why she's hunting them, how she's hunting them. And I'm sure that will play out over the next couple issues. But this is a fantastic story. Some of Francis Manapul's best work. I really enjoy it. The balance between kind of this fun family feel of a story and the danger and the tension of them being hunted is a really nice balance. I give Peter Tomasi a lot of credit, along with Francis Manapul, because he's helping to plot it and pace it and what have you. So yeah, definitely recommend it. I mean, all these Ghost Machine titles are just so good. I love the scene of them playing hockey. It's just so fun. So definitely check that out if you're so inclined. All right, next up we have from the mind of James Tynion, The Deviant. Now, this book started way back in Christmas season of 2023. So well over a year ago, and we're finally getting the last issue. So just to nitpick here a little bit, I hate it when things are this late. I mean, I hate it when things are late at all because it robs the story of momentum. People forget. Even when I started reading this, I didn't have time to go back and look at the previous couple issues. So I was just like, all right, let me see if I can pick it up. I did remember what happened and what have you. But it didn't land with as much impact. And especially for a story like this about a serial killer who dresses up like Santa, and how a writer and the writer's, I think it's his boyfriend, I don't think they're married, how that interest in this serial killer and wanting to write about him completely upends their lives. It's really interesting. So a lot of tension. It's definitely for mature readers. There's a lot of blood and gore and sexual themes and what have you. But it should have landed with a lot of impact because it's a fantastic story, really riveting. But you lose some of that. You lose some of that immediacy and intimacy because you just can't hold on to it forever. So I think this will read fantastic in a trade, and I think the trade came out last week as well, along with the final issue. It's illustrated by Joshua Hickson, and I don't know any details. I don't know if maybe Hickson got sick or he just slowed down or had some reason that it's been months and months and months since issue 8 came out. Again, it's too bad. But on the other hand, the whole story is out there now. It collected. You can pick up the trade. I wouldn't say, okay, now that the whole thing's out there, go track down the single issues. I mean, you can if you want, if you think that they might be worth something someday, and they very well might be, because this is the type of story that would make a fantastic feature film or a really great streaming show. And we know that James Tynion has his Tiny Onion production studio, so this could perhaps be on the small screen at some point, or the big screen. But just in terms of reading it and enjoying it as a story, get the collected edition, read it all in one sitting. You'll really love it. The lettering by Hassan Otsman Elhau is great as well. And even though it was late, and as much as I don't like that and wish it had been a little more timely, I would not have wanted this book to be illustrated by anyone else. I'm glad Tynion didn't say, Josh can't finish in time, let's get somebody else. Because what Hickson brings is really important, and you can see it here on this first page here, Milwaukee 2023. The atmosphere. That's the word that I keep coming back to. The atmosphere that Hickson provides is really fantastic. Now, this, the story in and of itself isn't, the most original. A serial killer, frames somebody else for his crimes. A loved one is trying to clear that person's name. They get wrapped up in the whole case, and they get blamed, and suspicion falls on them as well. Maybe they were helping their loved one commit these crimes and what have you. So all that, those are things that we've seen before. But the style with which Hickson draws it and draws us in, and has a sense of intimacy and a sense of tension and a sense of stakes, consequences, is really important. Plus, the dialogue from James Tynion is really great. He gets a lot of Tynion gets a lot of credit for his characterization, and rightly so. But what I don't hear enough people give him credit for is his scripting, his dialogue. There are those writers where the dialogue is like super sharp and witty, and everybody cracks one-liners, and we chuckle and whatever. But in reality, not everybody talks that way. And so, as fun as it is to read those type of issues, and you can see the incredible art by Hickson here with the latest victim of the Deviant. But to go back to my point about Tynion, not everybody talks that way. Not everybody has razor sharp wit in real life. And what I think Tynion doesn't get enough credit for is the realism in his dialogue. Like, people, they don't all sound the same, but they sound authentic. They speak, with different voices, different vocabulary, and what have you. So that's something that I think that's intentional by James, and it's really, really fantastic. And you can see in this double-page spread here, again, gorgeous art by Hickson. Serial killer dressed up as Santa. Just incredible moment when protagonist and antagonist here face to face for the first time. The mystery is solved. There's not, I shouldn't say there's no dangling plot threads. There's a little bit of open-endedness, but for the most part, things are resolved. You find out where this guy came from, why he's doing what he's doing. We find out what happens to the various characters who are being blamed for the murders and what have you. So from that perspective, it's a very satisfying ending. It's not one of those, does he survive, does he not, or it doesn't do that typical horror movie thing where the villain's dead at the end, and then his eyes will fly open and then they go to the credits, jump cut scene to the credits. It's none of that. It's much more of a traditional ending, and a fantastic story. So despite my disappointment, I guess you would say, in the lateness of the project, I didn't have any disappointment over the actual quality of the story itself. I thought it was just really, really fantastic. Gorgeous art from Hickson, and very much worth your time. And James Tynion, once again, showing us that he's at the absolute top of his game. Okay, up next, we have another Mad Cave book. This one's called Crush Depth. It is from co-writers David D.B. Andre and Tim Daniel. Art is by Alex Sanchez, colors by Kurt Michael Russell, and letters by Justin Birch. This is a submarine story. The art by Sanchez does a good job of feeling claustrophobic and sort of ratcheting up the drama and the tension. So the basic understanding I got from reading the first issue is the surface world is sort of contaminated. We don't even know if there's any survivors up there. The people that are living on the submarine, they seem to be military for the most part. There's very much kind of a hierarchy, if you will, chain of command. And they get a distress call, and they're really very excited because they didn't even know if they're the last people on Earth or they're not on Earth, I guess. They're underwater, whatever, if they're the last survivors of the human race. So we do take a few pages early on to establish the characterization and get sort of a feel of life on this sub, which it's interesting how at times Sanchez shows that things are pretty roomy on this sub, and that's not necessarily the case as the story goes on and the tension starts to ramp up. So when they go to answer this distress call, which apparently just started broadcasting, they discover wreckage of another ship, and there's bodies floating in the water and what have you. So it seems they're far too late to do any sort of rescuing by answering this call. So the mystery is, who are these people? Why did they just get the distress call? Why wasn't it coming out before? and it's clear that bad things are about to happen. So the tension ramps up, the drama ramps up, sense of claustrophobia ramps up, and I'm just a sucker for submarine stories. Some of my favorite movies of all time take place in submarines. I like that feeling of claustrophobia. It adds tension. You can do things from a visual perspective in a sub that you can't do in other movies. So things like U-571, Hunt for Red October, Crimson Tide, those are just fantastic movies. So if you're a fan of that genre, I think you'll really enjoy this. And Bad Idea actually has a submarine story from one of my favorite writers, Robert Venditti, coming up in their next wave of books. So I'm looking forward to that as well. All right. Up next, we have From Oni Out of Alcatraz. This is from writer Christopher Cantwell, creator and showrunner of *Halt and Catch Fire*, Eisner nominated for his Doctor Doom series. He's done creator-owned work like Blue Flame and the Lee Harvey Oswald story over at Boom. He's written for Marvel and DC, had a long run on Iron Man. Fantastically talented. And so I mentioned the Lee Harvey Oswald book at Boom because that was, examining who Lee Harvey Oswald was and the whole conspiracy of him not acting alone or what have you, but based on true events. This is sort of the same here with this Out of Alcatraz, this first issue, Modesto, with gorgeous art by Tyler Crook. So if you're not familiar, Alcatraz, an island prison, it's no longer open, it's no longer used to house prisoners. You can actually go and take a tour, but it was notorious as being, you couldn't break out. Like, it was, first of all, you're on a little island. You'd have to swim in like super cold water to even try to escape, and the whole idea, nobody ever escaped from Alcatraz. There were 3 men who disappeared, and the urban myth about did they survive, did they not. So the Anglin brothers and Frank Morris, and there was supposed to be a 4th member, but he got trapped in his cell or something. I can't remember exactly what happened. I do remember going to see Escape from Alcatraz, the movie with Clint Eastwood, way back when. I saw it at the drive-in. I was little, super little. But my dad was a big Clint Eastwood fan. But anyway, we don't know actually what happened. The official story is they drowned and they found their makeshift raft and what have you, but they never found their bodies. And so, the myth of that, the mystery of that has perpetuated over the years. Did they escape? Did they drown? And the bodies got swept out to sea. Nobody really knows for sure. So Cantwell is picking up those threads, again, with gorgeous art here from Christopher Cantwell. And the other thing I want to point out, I mean, this thing is like 50 pages. You get a big chunk of story here. And I thought, when I heard about this Out of Alcatraz, I thought it was going to be more about the planning and the escape itself. But the escape is like, we dive right in to the escape and really get moving on where these guys go and where they end up. And what's really interesting about it is that, they meet up. It's clear they've gotten some help as the people in the prison guards or whatever, realize that they're gone. It's clear that these guys have gotten help from the outside. We see this woman here who has helped them and is helping them hide out and what have you. And we find out they made a deal, and they're going to go to this farm in Canada where they're going to have to work for like 6 years to, and that's a longer period of time, because when it was supposed to be 3 of them, I think it was like only 2 years, but now that there's less of them, it's more. And so the whole idea, and again, Christopher Cantwell, really smart writer, love the themes that he explores. The idea of, well, if I'm going to have to do 6 years of servitude, wasn't I better off just staying in prison? And so the idea that the prisons that we are in are not necessarily made of concrete and steel bars, right? Like, we have responsibilities in life, we have obligations in life. And those things, in a way, can be prisons as well. So, yeah, these guys aren't, they're outside now, but in a way, they're still trapped. They're still in prison. And that's one of the themes that's going to be explored, along with kind of that's the kind of the below that I'm getting, as opposed to the surface level interesting story about the danger they're in, with people hunting them, and just the tension that they're feeling, and not getting along themselves because the tensions are high and they're worried about being caught and what have you. And that initial escape scene that we saw when they're on the raft, where one of the brothers supposedly drowned. But then, as we get to the end of this first issue, we see him there drinking in a bar in Modesto, and we discover that he survived after all, and now he's out for revenge. Revenge on his own brother, revenge on Frank Morris, perhaps. He's not real happy that he fell out of the raft and they just kept going, that they didn't circle back. Now, his brother wanted to, but Frank was like, no, we can't stop, we'll get caught, what have you. So, will this be a revenge story as well? Remains to be seen. So, super interesting story. Last time I talked to Chris, we were hoping to have him on to chat about this, but we haven't been able to sync up schedules. But I'm sure at some point we'll have him on to talk about it, hopefully before issue 2 drops, or when the whole series is over and we can talk about the whole thing in more detail. But really gorgeous art from Tyler Crook. The fact that it's based on real events is interesting, especially because we don't know the truth of what happened way back when. I think it was 1969. They broke out, 68, something like that. So really, really curious to see what approach Chris takes in examining or postulating, what their life was like. They might all end up dead in a completely different way. They survived the escape. They didn't drown. But who knows? They could, be facing an even worse fate. I guess we'll have to wait and see. Okay, up next we have second issue of a book that Rocky and I both really enjoyed the first issue. It's Bug Wars, issue number 2 from Jason Aaron. We've got Mahmoud Asrar handling the art duties. I think it's, I want to say Matt Wilson handling the colors. Get there. Yeah, Matt Wilson on colors. And then letters and design by Becca Carey. So the Slaymaker family, we met in the first issue. We found out that their father has unfortunately passed away. And Slade, Slaymaker, that we see on the cover here, much like his father, has a fascination. Like his father was a scientist, studied bugs, what have you. Slade has an affinity for bugs. His brother Sid doesn't. He's actually on the complete other end of the spectrum, is terrified of bugs. And it's hinted that, perhaps he saw was the one that discovered his father's dead body, and it was being eaten by bugs because he'd been dead for a little while. So the brothers, there's some animosity because they look at insects in a completely different way. Well, in the first issue, Slade discovered in his basement workspace, that his father's basement workspace, an amulet, and when he touched it, it shrank him down and it transported him to his backyard. And so that's where the Honey, I Shrunk the Kids sort of reference comes in, being shrunken down to a very small size in your own backyard. When we had Jason on to talk about the book, he mentioned Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. And I had some listeners and people out in the audience that were like, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, that's the last thing I want to read about. That's kid stuff or whatever. And it totally turned them off. I want to be sure that everybody understands this is so far from Honey, I Shrunk the Kids as you can possibly get. The only parallels are the fact that he's in his own backyard, and it's very dangerous to be even in your own backyard when you are, a tenth of an inch tall, when you're a little tiny bug size. But that's where the parallels end. In terms of the actual story, we're talking Conan the Barbarian, we're talking Lord of the Rings, we're talking Game of Thrones. There's a whole thriving world out there in the backyard of all these different clans, all these different warrior sects of insects, spider witches, apparently that can wield magic and what have you. And Sid finds himself in this unfamiliar world, and he's trying to survive. So he ends up captured and taken to the Blood Hole, which is sort of like this gladiatory arena where the citizens of the realm, if you will, of his own backyard watch people fight to the death for their amusement. And the reason they're doing this, and this has been studied at times before, where people have gone and studied these things about why would you want to watch other people murder others? And it's like it kind of reminds you that you're still alive, and when you live under the constant threat of being killed and being destroyed, that can be a really interesting way to make yourself feel alive. And the threat that they all face is the threat of destruction at any time by this, what do they call it? Like the Annihilator. And the Annihilator is, you can see kind of they built a statue of it here. It's this giant lawnmower, and a statue of Sid. So, obviously this is nowhere near the size of Sid or the size of the lawnmower, but you can see, like, that's what they live in fear of, right? And if you're a little tiny bug, you can understand the destruction that a lawnmower running over the place where you live would cause. So I really love this this scene. I love when Slade sees it and he's like, oh, that's the Annihilator. That's the thing they're scared of. That's kind of their, biggest fear is Sid and his lawnmower. So it's really interesting. And we see that Sid is looking for his brother, doesn't know that their mother's at work. So where is Sid, or where is Slade, rather? Sid's looking for him. Really, really interesting. A lot of fun. I encourage everybody to go and listen to the interview that I did with Jason Aaron and Mahmoud Asrar. They talked about kind of getting together for the origins of this, which came out of their work that they did together on Conan the Barbarian, where there was one particular sequence where they wanted to draw, where Mahmoud had drawn Conan like decapitating somebody, and their head went like kind of rolling across a 2-page spread. Marvel said, no, you can't do that, it's too graphic. And so out of being told no, they're like, man, we need to do a story, a barbarian story that's completely out there. We can get as wild and crazy and bloody and gory as we want. No one can tell us no. We can do whatever we want. And this is the end result of that, Bug Wars. So the first issue was very, very well received. Second issue is out there now. I do encourage you guys all to go check it out. All right, last book we're going to talk about in detail here is Deadly Tales of the Gunslinger. This is from Jimmy Palmiotti. Oh, let me share my screen, make sure you guys know what I'm seeing. So this is from Jimmy Palmiotti. Patrick Reynolds is the regular series artist, but in this particular issue, we have art by Chad Hardin, which is really, really fantastic art. It tells the story of a circus and how a guy lost the circus in a poker game, of all things. And having Chad Hardin's art, now Chad obviously a longtime collaborator with Jimmy Palmiotti and Jimmy's wife Amanda Connor on the Harley Quinns, and having the art by Chad on this, I think is really fantastic. If you're talking about telling a story about circus, I think you want a style that's a little more cartoony, a little more approachable, as opposed to the dark, brooding style of Patrick, which works really, really well. But again, I think it's really interesting. But anyway, the idea of this circus and the guy that owns the circus loses it in a poker game. The person he loses it to is not necessarily a nice guy, and in fact, we find out later that it's the guy who has the Gunslinger Spawn's sister held hostage, as it were. So he's out here in the wilderness. There is a bit of naivete to him at this point. He doesn't understand his powers. He doesn't understand how he got them. He doesn't really understand his place in the world, what a hellspawn is. Like, none of those questions have been answered at all. As experienced as he is as a gunfighter and kind of almost a soldier of fortune in a way, and seems to be willing to help out the little guy, there's so many questions that he doesn't know so much that he doesn't even know the questions to ask. And so he's out there. A woman comes along, asks him to help her rescue her daughter, because her daughter, she's the one with the horns here. She's also supposedly being held by the circus as sort of an exhibit, if you will, to be displayed. And in rescuing her is how Gunslinger Spawn finds out that that the owner of the circus is the same man that he believes kidnapped his sister. So he's trying to get information from these sort of circus employees here, of who this guy is and where he is, and he's going to go out there and try to rescue his sister. So there are emotional stakes here. It's clear that Gunslinger Spawn is starting to establish sort of a moral code, but he definitely walks in the gray area, and in that way he's sort of a typical Spawn, but he's a very atypical Spawn in that he doesn't understand at all what's happening to him, what the extent of his powers are, or what have you. And this is all rendered beautifully from Chad Hardin, as you can see. So I love this Deadly Tales story that Jimmy Palmiotti has been weaving. the diversity of the Spawn titles is really impressive. Whether you want to read like police procedural, fan of like Law and Order or whatever, you can go and read Sam and Twitch. If you want a Western, you can read this. If you want superhero stuff, you can go and read, what is it? It's not King Spawn. It's Scorched. Scorched is sort of the team book. And then if you want to have superheroes with a little more of a horror bent, that's the main Spawn book. And then we have other titles that are coming out. Hope you all guys all had a chance to listen to my interview with Thomas Healy, the editor-in-chief over there. He's bringing Nyx back in Black Ritual, Book of Nyx. So, and there's a lot more to come. The diversity of the Spawn line is really impressive right now. And kudos to everybody over there at Todd McFarlane Productions. They've been doing a fantastic job of introducing a wide variety of books for people of all different fandoms, if you will. No matter what kind of story you like or what your genre is. Rat City, which is from Erica Schultz, which has been fantastic as well. That's very much a sort of a future science fiction story. That's the direction you want to head. So yeah, definitely check out Deadly Tales of the Gunslinger. Very, very good. Really impressed by it. So that being said, let me go over, even though it's a week ago, let me go over a few of the other books that were out last week. In case you missed them, we had the 72nd issue of Saga come out from Brian K. Vaughan. G.I. Joe number 5, which is a penultimate issue of the first arc, came out last week as well. Walking Dead Deluxe is up to issue 109, which is just re-releasing the Walking Dead issues, but in color. Sonic the Hedgehog, which seems to be a hotter property than ever, is up to issue 77. I mentioned Rat City. It's up to issue 12. Great art by J. Carlos and sort of the futuristic Spawn story that's really building on itself. We also have Serpent. It's not. That might be it. Yeah, I guess that's it. I thought there was one more. Oh, I know what it was. It was L.A. Strong #1 from Mad Cave Studios, which is an anthology where all the proceeds are going to charities to support the victims of the LA wildfires. So I didn't get a chance to read it, but I heard it's really, really good. And if you want to support a good cause, you can look for that book, LA Strong. Hopefully your comic shop will still have some copies of that. So again, bit of a shorter episode. Apologies for it being so late. When it comes to Book of the Week, a little bit of a tougher call because there were many, many deserving books. I thought The Last Boy from Dan Panosian was really, really fantastic. Out of Alcatraz as a debut issue from Christopher Cantwell was great as well. But ultimately, I got to stick with the power fantasy. It seems to continually blow me away and really impress me. And as I say that, I'm going to go with Co-Books of the Week. I can't just pick that because the more I think about it, the more I think The Last Boy from Dan Panosian is worthy of being a Book of the Week as well. Because it's also one, much like Power Fantasy, that I'm still thinking about. It's a week later, and I'm still thinking about this. Like, just the idea of the boy who won't grow up, not being able to grow up, not being able to let go. And that's an interesting concept in and of itself if we start to examine it closely. But the context that Dan adds to this story when we see that's the part we know, he won't grow up. But when we see everybody else growing and evolving around him, that juxtaposition, that comparison between the two is really, really intriguing to me. And so I can't wait to see where it goes. So I'll give The Last Boy Book of the Week nod along with Power Fantasy, which is really fantastic as well. So again, everybody, apologies for it being so late. It could have at least been out a day sooner, half a day sooner, if I hadn't had the technical issues. But hopefully in the future we can avoid these delays. We'll try to get things out in a more timely fashion. So really appreciate you joining as always. Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.